It's Sunday, August 13, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is one of the world's leading thinkers, an internationally recognized economist and author with a degree in neuroscience. His weekly essays on medium.com are essential reading. Umair Haque, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
So it's been a while since we last spoke. In fact, you were one of the first guests that we had here on the Weekend Show, and so it's kind of thrilling to see where the world is at now compared to just over a year ago when we last had a conversation. I read your essays every week and have done for years. The one that really caught my eye a couple of days ago was entitled, "We're in a civilizational emergency, but we're still in denial about it." And you wrote that you looked at Twitter to glance what was going on in the world, and the scenes which greeted me, you wrote, were nothing short of apocalyptic. Billowing clouds of smoke and ash, flames ripping through a town, people fleeing to the beach, people being left for dead. This is the reality of climate change, wildfires. Hawaii's never seen anything like this. As we're talking now, 55 people have died. Rising global temperatures and drought have helped turn parts of Hawaii into a tinderbox ahead of one of the deadliest fires in modern U.S. history. And strong winds from a nearby cyclone kind of made this happen so fast. We're going to talk in a little bit about Donald Trump and his crimes and how this is all connected. Of course, he took the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of just react to that essay and specifically to this tragedy in Hawaii.
Well, that was a real essay. I mean, it was a real event that happened to me. So I just kind of woke up and I went on Twitter, or if you want to call it X, I guess you call it X these days. And, just to scan the headlines, and there's all kinds of crazy things happening these days. But this was really apocalyptic, right? And this was before it turned into a big news story. So I was seeing footage directly from people in the town. And it was crazy. This is the footage we've all seen now. People driving through the flames and jumping into the ocean and the whole town on fire. And all of it. And, so let's put it in context. Let's think of the events that have happened this summer. You had Greece going up in flames, right? We've had record temperatures across the globe. We've had 4 great heat domes, as they're called, stretching across the width of the whole globe. We've had continental scale mega fires in Canada that we don't know how to put out. So this has been a really, really, what is the word, right? So like on one level, it's apocalyptic summer. It's the summer that the mega scale impacts of climate change began to arrive. And even though they've been long predicted, right? Especially in the States, we kind of do this thing of playing this silly game of disbelief, right? Or like both sides are like, is this just a theory, or is it going to happen one day? And
certainly not connecting the dots between the climate crisis and wildfires, for example.
Absolutely right. I mean, this is basic science, right? There are hard causal relationships at work here, right? I'm an economist, and in my line of work, the relationships are soft causality. This is hard causality. This is like physics and chemistry, right? So, an apocalyptic summer. And I think for the first time, because of the sheer scale and scope of what happened this summer, the mega scale impact of climate change as an issue is beginning to enter public awareness. Long, long overdue.
40 years overdue.
40 years overdue.
Yeah.
So we've known about this for years and years and years. And so one of the things that happened this summer, right? And let me tie it to the political discussion. So way back, if you think in 2016, 2015, even before Trump got elected, there were those of us who were saying, look, this is an authoritarian movement. This is a proto-fascist movement. And once it comes into office, it's going to aspire towards full fascism. And at that time, we were roundly dismissed and mocked, right? I mean, every august newspaper in the States would have editorials in those days saying, hey, you can't call that fascism, if you remember those days, right?
I mean, Hillary Clinton made a speech about him. I mean,
right,
she knew. She had, and she was a candidate, and people thought it was just her kind of being a bit too political, but she knew.
She knew. Yeah. And she was excoriated for it.
Yeah.
As we all were, right? And so the same kind of dynamic has come to pass with climate change, right? And so now, years later, in 2023, the very same people who back then would say, oh, you can't call it fascism, are out there screaming from the rooftops, oh no, it's fascism, please somebody save us. So the same kind of thing is beginning to happen with climate change, where a lot of, so this is what it means for an issue to enter public awareness, right? That sense of, let's not call it denial, because it's not the same crowd as the hardcore climate denialists. It's just that there was, in the center, this wasn't a big issue. It was minimized, right? It was like, well, it's going to happen in 2050. And even if it does happen in 2050, it's not going to be that bad. And so what's happened now in the world is that the mega scale impacts that were supposed to arrive in 2050, according to all the big reports, are arriving now, 25 years early. Yeah. And of course, that raises the question, if this is 2023 and it's looking this apocalyptic, what on earth does 2050 look like? So we're in dire trouble. And I say that to you as an economist, and I think everybody should understand this, because listen, this isn't like, it's not just about weather, and it's not just a game. This has dire consequences for our economies and our ways of life. One of the things we know that has already happened this summer is that crop yields are off almost everywhere because of the mega weather, right? From China to India to Europe, whatever crop you're talking about. Wheat, rice, crop, doesn't matter. Crop yields are way off. So that is probably going to fuel an inflationary surge going forward. And as we already know, inflation is still pretty high for food. Then there's the question of things like insurance, right? So we just had huge insurance companies pulling out of California, Florida.
Yeah.
Now, where do pension funds invest? Insurance companies. So as these industries begin to really feel the effects of climate risk, our basic systems really come under threat from financial systems, whether it's pension systems or even banking systems. We already see the effects on food and water systems. Think about, I don't know how many parts of America woke up to unbreathable air like a month ago because of the Canadian wildfires, right? It was down as far as DC, where I spend a lot of the year. Yeah. So these are real effects, and they're serious effects. And the question for us is, what are we going to do about it? Because as an economist...
Can I just ask you, because the thing that bothers me the most is that all of these things separately are a disaster, right? But when you put them all together, it's the thing that people don't make that connection between weather events and climate change. You know, they're like, oh, we're used to tornadoes. It's normal here. Or in Arizona where it's 125 degrees. They're like, oh, well, it's the summer. You know, that's what Fox News was saying. It's the summer. Yeah. And so there is a problem with people who do not take climate change that seriously. Yeah. There's always an excuse. So with crop yields, it could be, oh, well, it was the pandemic, or it's the war in Ukraine, because they've heard about grain issues there. But they don't realize that it's nuanced. It's all of these things.
That's right. So we don't teach people, and I include myself in this, as an economist. So we don't teach people how to think about systems very well. That's especially true in American media, right? We have a 24-hour news cycle. It will pick one tiny chunk of an issue and just beat it to death, instead of teaching people, how does this system work and what are the system effects? So when we think of climate change, a lot of the time what happens is exactly what you said. People think, oh, it's an increase in mega weather of some kind, right? And that's bad, but I'll survive it. It's not a huge deal, right? They're not thinking, because nobody's teaching them about the system effects. Well, so if there's mega weather over here and this region runs dry or begins to become uninhabitable, or it can't produce the crops that it used to, what happens to economies? If the pension systems go down, if the banking system of an area goes down, what happens to economies? So this affects us all in really dire and profound ways, and it already has been, right? So if you think about why have food prices been so high? Well, yeah, part of it's the war in Ukraine. Part of it is also what, greedflation, as it's come to be called, from corporates. But part of it is also that crop yields have slowly been failing over the last few years as climate change has intensified, right? So these are real effects and real problems. And part of the thing that we have to do now is begin to discuss this with people in a system kind of way, right? From tracing not just like, oh, here's the mega weather, how are you going to survive it? Not just in a moral way, even to say that, oh, isn't it terrible that that town burned down? Yes, it is terrible that that town burned down. But almost in a practical way, right? Like, how much longer is this going to go on? And how much more juice do our systems have to survive it? That's a real question, and that's a big question. Because we're already at the brink in many ways, right? So you don't have to look very hard to see areas of America where water systems are beginning to fail. We just had research come out that shows that the cost of living for a family now exceeds the median income. So you can't make ends meet on the median income. And we've all known that to an extent for a long time, but research now confirms it, right? So what is the big effect of climate change? It's not, for the average person, it may not even be mega weather if you're lucky to live in a livable place, but it is going to be rising prices, higher interest rates, shortages, system failures, all of this kind of stuff. So it's a real thing. And we have to contend with it very, very carefully now. Because as we've seen, we are in a zone that we are completely out of our depth, right? So Canada's coast-to-coast mega fires, we don't know how to put them out. Hawaii on fire, it happened before anybody could do much about it.
They couldn't even turn on the sirens, which they have. And here's the other thing. They said, we used the electronic method of warning people. But of course, all the cell towers were out. And so people were not getting messages. We're relying on technology.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you have a power cut and the cell system is on the same main ring as... It doesn't make sense.
Right. So none of our infrastructure is up to this challenge, right? I mean, we had another effect. I think it was both in America and Europe, in parts of America and Europe, when the heat domes were so intense that the utility pipes and cables started melting. Our infrastructure is not ready for any of this, right? So what happens if the temperature exceeds the wet bulb limit, right? Where your body starts breaking down, shutting down, and the pipes are melting too, or the water pipes are melting, or the electricity.
Yeah.
You
get hot water out of the cold tap.
You get hot water out of the cold tap. So we are hitting those limits. So this year, one of the calculations we did at my little research thing is to calculate wet bulb temperature, right? So there was a new paper that came out that said wet bulb temperatures are low. So wet bulb is where the human body stops working, is lower. So before it was a theoretical thing. So for the first time this year, we had lab research, and they sent young, probably college guys, into a lab and sat them down in extreme wet bulb kind of heat and tested them. When did their heart rate start spiking, and when did their organs start shutting down, and all this kind of thing. They found that in the real world, the temperature is much lower. That limit is much lower than it is in theory. And so doing some quick calculations, we've already begun to hit those limits in some places during these heat domes. From Phoenix to parts of Italy, to parts of Greece, to, of course, parts of the Middle East. So this is real stuff, right? And we're not ready. And because we haven't been talking about it, it's catching us by surprise, right?
Because it's not sexy. It's not box office.
It's not sexy, and I know it's not sexy, and it's not box office. And to me, that's also weird, right? Because I think it's
I know. I can't get enough of this information. And
I don't really get.
People completely switch off. And we should be clear, we've now surpassed the requirement for the Paris Climate Accord. So we're never going to hit that target.
Yep.
Which is what, they all agreed to. And, Donald Trump took us out and Joe Biden took us back in to the Paris Climate Accord. But we're not going to hit those targets. Yeah. And as you say, climate change, the fear of climate change, which in our minds was like, it's decades away.
Yeah, way away.
It is already here. And if you can't see that, Because, I mean, what do you say to the Republicans who think it's just a Democrat hoax? I mean, this is the other problem, isn't it? What about these people who are governors or mayors?
I'll tell you one interesting thing that's beginning to happen, and I've noticed this from my own writing and audience a little bit, that as mega weather increases, and it begins to hit typically conservative communities, rural places, farmers, all of these kinds of guys, a lot of them are beginning to become really worried. And I'm seeing a lot more interest from people like that. So I think there is a case of it becoming a real public issue, right? Because I think, especially in America, so America's weird, right? We have this idea in America that we can run fast, we can outrun anything.
Yeah.
It's not going to catch up with us.
Yeah.
And we've done it for a lot of things. We've tried to outrun it, and maybe in some respect we have. I mean, look at the size of the national debt, right? It's gigantic, and there we are still running. Yeah. So we're outrunning the debt. I mean, we can talk about endless numbers of things that we've outrun. This, we're not outrunning. This is outrunning us, right? It's going way, way faster than we ever thought it would. So it's not 2050, it's here. I think, going back to your point, I think part of the reason that people turn off from this issue, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, they think it's so big that there's nothing they can do. Fine, fair enough. Another reason is that it's couched in these incredibly kind of like boring, these boring things, right? Like the Paris Treaty and this Accord and Copenhagen or what, it doesn't matter, right? So
it doesn't make sense. And also people like Greta Thunberg are constantly criticized by the media and laughed at.
And mocked.
It's crazy that we can only really name one climate activist on the planet when the planet is burning.
Absolutely right. It's strange that, it's so one of the great unsung heroes of this age is Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN. It's the guy that got up there and said, this is not the age of global warming anymore. This is now the age of global boiling. And this was right after the 4 great heat domes were around the world and Greece was on fire, and it was right before the fires in Hawaii. And it's much to his credit. But I think he is the only global leader that we have of that caliber that's really going out there and saying that and pressing for change. So he is saying we need a global New Deal, a global Green New Deal, but more importantly, a New Deal to address these huge inequalities we see around the world, right? We all know how much richer billionaires have got during the last few years of the pandemic. It's scandalous, right? And we need to put some of those resources towards investing in all the technologies and systems that we're going to need to survive this age, because this stuff is here to stay. It's going to get worse every summer. So,
and doing it without calling it socialism. Because I think that's the great fear of Americans. They fear socialism, they fear communism.
Absolutely right.
And they think that if you share the wealth a little bit, then you are collapsing into a kind of socialist state.
So this is one of the great tragedies of America, right? Is that, and it happened during we're probably about the same age, right? And it probably happened like during our adult lifetimes that American political discourse got like perverted and eroded. Like nothing means anything sane anymore, right?
Well, so 2016 is a good place to start.
2016 is right. And that's so, and now it's been corroded and perverted beyond all belief and repair, right?
We're living in the upside down, Umair.
We're living in the upside down. But the way we got here is that, and this is something that early on in my career, right? So I came to London to train and study and whatnot. And early on in my career, I really used to try and make the point, and American media would always ask me, hey, can you write something for us? And I would always want to write the same thing for them. And the thing that I would want to write was going to say, Americans, please take a look at what are known as social democracies. Social democracies are now doing better than you in every regard. They have longer lives, healthier lives, happier lives, that people are more stable and secure and all this kind of thing. And I could never, ever get a single editor at a newspaper or magazine to say yes to this. And after so for a while, I was like, what's going on? Am I just a bad writer? Like, do they hate me? I don't get it. After a while, I realized it was the social.
People don't want to hear it.
People don't want to hear it.
And even the Republicans now, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, claiming that America is not a democracy. It is a constitutional republic. Right. And they won't even include the word democracy.
Exactly right. And so that's the end of this process of the perversion of the meanings of things.
Yeah.
So when we begin on our side of sanity and progress by being afraid to say something as simple as, hey guys, social democracy works. It works in Canada, it works in France, it works in Germany, everywhere it works. It works better than whatever we want to call this. Predatory capitalism, it doesn't matter what you call it, right? But it works better than this. If you don't defend that simple reality, then you find yourself a few years later, like we are now, at the point where these guys are saying, democracy doesn't matter. They're openly, aggressively against it, right? So we have done a bad job on our side of really kind of defining our side of the Overton window and pushing it. So America's fallen way behind the rich world, right? We don't have to, that's not an argument anymore. Everybody knows that. And that's even the core appeal of Trumpism, right? Which is that, like, why is your life so miserable, right? The conclusion is the part that's different. I alone can save you. And hate those dirty subhumans, right? So that's kind of like proto-fascist, fascist part of it. But the core of it, like all great and kind of resonant fascist populist movements, it contains this grain of truth in it, which is that American life has gotten really, really difficult, right? So just today, what I was writing about was the latest research that came out. It's not even research, statistics, right? The suicides skyrocketed. Boom, bang, at an all-time peak. Terrible, awful, tragic. But you can see all of these things being interrelated, right? Life is so desperate. Life is so stressful. People turn to demagogues. People turn to scapegoats. They throw sanity and reason away, and they're ready to turn their backs on democracy. And so what climate change is not even like in that picture, right? It's like... Yeah. If you're willing to let... And
in Donald Trump, you have a guy that doesn't know what climate change is.
Yeah,
and this is the thing that I always found fascinating. Whenever he was asked, he'd say, we've got the cleanest air and the cleanest water.
Right,
he had no understanding of global temperatures and how it's measured and what the science means. And, you know, that guy could get back in again. I mean, it's like, China and the US are the two most polluting countries on the planet. Yeah. And neither of them seem to care much.
And so this is, So this is another topic that I think really needs to be brought home to Americans. Okay, so how does the global economy work? And we built the global economy. Okay, we're America. We built it. We did it. It's ours. So how does it work? Well, it works like this. Those guys in the East, China, India, are the producers or the organizers, and we are the consumers. We are the world's biggest consumers. Us and then Europe, a distant second. 80% of our economy is consumption. Most of what we consume comes from there. Some from Mexico, a lot from China, a lot from India, various other countries. So that's how the global economy that we design works. Now that comes back to the chief complaint of Trumpism, which is that the working class, all those factory jobs, the Rust Belt, blah, 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 got hollowed out. Those guys really did get kind of left for dead. So there's a real thing in that complaint. But let's tie it back to climate change for a second. What's going on? Why is China building these huge China's going back to coal. Building, I don't know how many coal-fired plants now. Well, a big part of the reason is that our demand in the West is insatiable. So we are kind of exporting our carbon emissions there. Okay, so if we look at the global picture of carbon emissions, it's, again, this is the reason why people get bored and tune out, right? Because all this stuff is so complex and so abstruse, but it's actually very simple to understand. What's happening is that we have managed to kind of like bring down our emissions, but mostly by shifting them to the countries that are still making the stuff that we consume. Okay? So, and this is a big part of the reason why climate change keeps going on. Right? China.
Places like Hawaii, which don't have anything like the amount of pollution. They don't have the cars and the factories and they are the ones who are burning and suffering. And there are national conversations or international conversations going on about reparations for smaller islands who have not caused the climate change but are going to be the first to be on the wrong end of it.
You know, it's funny. I posted a picture from Phoenix, or retweeted a picture from Phoenix, and it was a picture of it was so hot that even this giant old cactus, poor thing, had wilted. And it was such a sad thing to see a cactus falling over because it was too hot. So I retweeted it, and a lot of people found it just as resonant as I did. But one person made this really super sharp catch. They said, hey, did you see that just under that is a newly built road? So this is kind of where we are, right? That we're not paying attention to like what the planet is telling us, what our own economy is telling us at this point at all. You know, if we think about how many places have been affected this summer, it's a lot, right? So Florida, California, Hawaii, we had flooding in the Northeast. I mean, we had orange skies, and, you know, people, friends in DC told me they could smell Canada burning from K Street, right? So it's coming.
And that's all within the space of 6 months. I mean, that's
3
what's
months.
so crazy about it. It's like,
3
that's
months.
not over a decade. That's just in 6 months.
Yeah, 3 months.
Listen, we have to take a quick pause for our sponsor, but I want to come back and talk about what Joe Biden's doing about it and why he hasn't called for a climate emergency. Next. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your wacky neighbour or some sketchy message board. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong, so instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-nominated device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavoured air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavours. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial that is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. I gave a Fume to my sister, and she was shocked at how flavourful and fresh it tasted. It's easy to hold and perfectly balanced, and quite honestly, extremely fun to fidget with. The real wood material and sleek design definitely classes it up, and she feels pretty cool holding it. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use code WEEKEND to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code WEEKEND to save an additional 10% off your order today. This show is sponsored by Lomi. I have a big family and, well, that means there's usually a lot of trash left over by the time the week comes to an end. And frankly, I used to feel a bit guilty about this. But then I got a Lomi. Now that I have a Lomi, it's changed the way I think about my food waste. Lomi transforms my garbage into gold at the push of a button. Lomi is a countertop electric composter that turns food scraps into dirt in under 4 hours. Now, I love composting, plus it's made cooking at home even more fun. There's no food rotting in the garbage and smelling up the kitchen. Thanks to Lomi, I only have to take the trash out once a week, and it's a hassle-free, mess-free experience. No more leaking bags. Here's something cool too. I turn my waste into nutrient-rich dirt that I can feed to my plants, lawn or garden. That means it's not going to landfill and producing methane gas. I get to help the environment and make my life easier. And all my food scraps, plant clippings, and even those leftovers I forgot in the back of my refrigerator go back into my garden, helping me grow more nutritious food right in my backyard. I learned that food waste makes up a huge portion of our personal carbon footprint. By reducing the amount of food I send to landfill, I'm helping do my part for the planet while also feeding my garden. Whether you want to start making a positive environmental impact or just grow a beautiful garden, Lomi is perfect for you. Head to lomi.com/weekend and use promo code WEEKEND to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you head to lomi.com/weekend and use promo code WEEKEND at checkout. Thank you, Lomi, for sponsoring this episode. We're back with Umair Haque. Joe Biden, interestingly, was asked the other day, why he hasn't announced a climate emergency. And he basically kind of said, well, we have, except he hasn't. And this is, in my view, part of the problem, because to me, calling a climate emergency means applying the Defense Production Act, putting everybody to work, building solar and wind farms, and taking this so seriously that because you could quite easily, I mean, Elon Musk has admitted this, and he owns Solar City, you could run all of the US's energy off of renewables if you built the infrastructure. And we've got like miles of desert where you could absolutely build these solar farms.
Absolutely right.
And the Defense Production Act would implore companies to down tools and pick up tools for renewables. And it would be very exciting, as in the same way when they built breathing apparatus for the pandemic.
Yeah. So this is what Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, means when he says we need a global New Deal, right? So before we come to Biden, right, and I know everybody wants to talk about Biden, rag on Biden, defend on Biden, whatever. Let's put this in a slightly more rigorous context, okay? So we can generate our electricity from renewable sources. That's true. There's another reason, though, that we need to declare a climate emergency, which is that a lot of the basics that we depend on, we don't know how to make them in a fossil fuel-free way yet, okay? Steel, cement, glass, iron, basic industrial chemicals, basic industrial processes, plastics. This is the stuff of our everyday lives. We don't know how to make it without fossil fuels yet. Okay, so what we need is like a series of Manhattan projects, right? We all just saw Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
We need a series of Manhattan projects to discover how to make this stuff in a fossil fuel-free way. And that is an incredibly serious problem. Okay, this is the basic stuff of our lives. This is the stuff we make our buildings out of. This is the stuff that, let's take another basic. Crops. We don't know how to have agriculture without fossil fuels. It's made out of cotton.
Yeah.
So this is a big problem. We don't know how to make the basics. So we can power a lot of things with renewable electricity. But one step downstream from that is where the problem is now, which is how do we transform that now clean electricity into all this stuff? Cotton, plastic, steel, iron, glass, whatever, right? So that's where we need investment. And as an economist, when I look at the numbers, they are terrifyingly bad. They are shocking. They make me, they are let me sound like Donald Trump. They're the worst numbers I've ever seen in my life. Okay? And I mean that. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Worst numbers in history.
Yeah.
So fossil fuel subsidies right now are 10 times our level of climate finance. Okay? Our level of climate finance as a world is about $600 billion. That's nothing. That's not even 1% of our GDP as a world.
Yeah.
It's a trifling amount. It's like the amount of Elon Musk and Bill Gates, the net worth of Elon Musk and Bill Gates put together, right? So we need to do this stuff, or else the future is very clear, right? The emissions keep climbing. Every summer gets more apocalyptic. The sea ice melts, whatever, right? So you can go down the list of blockbuster Hollywood style special effects if you want, but that's the future. So we need to think, we should all know that, right? There are like 3 basic facts everybody should know at this juncture in human history. The list of stuff we don't know how to make without fossil fuels, number 1. What climate tipping points are, number 2. So for example, forests in Canada are burning. They release huge amounts of carbon. When they're gone, there's no more trees to store carbon. Okay? Tipping point. So, and the third one is the thing that connects the two, which is the basic numbers on climate finance. $600 billion. Not nearly enough. So what if we estimated that we need to spend, get this, 50 trillion, okay, to really get to grips with these problems over a couple of decades.
And we can afford it. I mean, that's the other thing we should mention.
Yeah, of course we can afford
it. Based on the amount we spend on Social Security and on the military,
yeah,
the world's community should be coming together to invest in these things. And the whole world can afford it.
Absolutely right. Let me put some of these numbers in context for you. 600 billion, less than the budget of the U.S. military. It's not a, and that's the That's the stated budget of the US military, right? The real budget, as we all know, is God knows how much, right? So we can afford this. These are very, very small numbers so far that we're talking about. They have to be scaled up in big ways. And that comes back to everybody kind of like, Biden, right? So I sympathize with him. I think his heart is in the right place. I think he's in a tough spot. I think he needs to do more. Okay, so for me, you had a very good description of what does declaring a climate emergency mean? Defense Production Act, blah, 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 blah. Go down the list, right? Putting people to work. So for me, there's another aspect to it too, which is getting up on a stage with Antonio Guterres in front of the whole world. Saying,
which he hasn't done.
Which he hasn't done.
Yeah.
Which he hasn't done. And saying, this is the age of global boiling. This is America's number one priority because it is humankind's number one priority. So I think that's really important. Now, Biden, we need to have a nuanced discussion about, and Americans don't do this well, right? It's like either or. It's very polarized.
Well, it's not a vote winner, Umair. I mean, this is part of the problem, isn't it? Because, Biden's success was because he's like an old white guy and he's a moderate.
Yeah, he's a safe choice.
Right. And so he wants to win the independent votes. He wants to bring a few Republicans over. He has to win for the sake of, a future kind of fascist America, right? So he has to win. And I think the timing of this climate crisis is a disaster for him. Because,
It's disastrous.
Right. If he wanted to go all out and go full on climate message, he could lose the election.
Yeah, it's disastrous.
To an orange
fascist. Exactly right. So look, let's zoom out, right? Let's zoom out and think about where we are in the world, which really kind of summarizes this predicament that Biden is in. We have a mounting climate crisis. Things are going south at incredible speed. 2050 is here in 2025. Which way are the world's politics going? They're going super fascist, super fast, right? They're going exactly the wrong direction. Nobody's voting for green parties. Nobody's voting for Green New Deals. Nobody's interested. A huge far right-wing wave has swept everywhere from Europe to India to China, God knows where, right? So looking at us civilizationally, instead of going in the political direction that we need to solve our biggest problem, we're running at light speed in the opposite direction. So this is the predicament Biden is in. He's stuck in this place trying to pull us forward a little bit without taking us all the way over here. That's why I said I sympathize with the guy. It's not a vote winner. It's a very difficult issue. And in some sense, how can I say? People blame Biden for not being aggressive enough on climate. Look, Biden has done a lot. If you ask me, he has turned America from a nation that nobody in the rich world would ever look to as an example of policy. Ever. On any issue. And now Europe is racing to catch up to what Biden is doing. China is terrified by what Biden is doing because at the heart of Bidenomics is the promise to make America an exporter again, like it was in its golden years. It's a very smart strategy, super smart strategy. So the problem is that there are two problems. One is that it's not going to happen fast enough to save the next election. America's a huge ship that has had decades of underinvestment. You can't turn it around in 2 years, right? So all of this reinventing an economy at this scale, this visionary scale, which he's talking about, which again is visionary enough that people in Europe, and Europe has led the world in green politics for ages, that those guys are sitting up and taking notice? I mean, this is not a joke, right? If we look at all the technologies of the future, not Silicon Valley kind of nonsense, but the real technologies of the future, bioplastics, hydropower, just go down the list of clean energy. All of that stuff is being pioneered in Europe, was being pioneered in Europe. And so when Biden came along and said, hey, we're going to be the leader in this, and then really took America's muscle and exerted it for the first time in decades, it created shockwaves across the economic and diplomatic world. I cannot tell you how many conversations I had with people who were like, oh my God, America's back. America's actually doing stuff again. What the hell are we going to do? So Bidenomics is a real thing. No matter how much the right wing tries to demonize it, and no matter how much those of us, and I count myself, who are kind of like, who would like to see more, don't think it's enough, it's still a real thing. And it's a real change in the world. The problem is that it's not going to turn the American ship around in a year, right? Who can do that? Nobody can do that. So the question then becomes, what where does that leave Biden and the Democrats, right? Because right now they're in a precarious place. People aren't connecting to this message that Bidenomics is turning things around. That's because a lot of the other indicators are, I hate to say it, but they're still pretty bad, right? So I talked to you about the suicide rate climbing, and that's because of a lot of things, right? This is because of financial stress, because of social stresses, a lack of social support systems. Inflation for a lot of basics is still super high, from housing to food. But these are not really things that you can bring under control in like a few years, right? After
and jobs numbers, which is the thing that they always quote,
right,
is also a bit of a distraction as well.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
they would be better off, Anthony. And I say this, look, I used to help run one of the world's biggest marketing groups, right? And so I say this to you in my marketing guys, they would be better off leveling with people.
Yeah.
Okay. Instead of constantly talking up whatever is a good number, and the jobs numbers are good.
Yeah.
But that's not enough, right? Because we all know that the median job doesn't pay enough even to feed a family anymore, right? So if you're creating all these jobs and the unemployment rate is low and you want people to, so the problem is they come along and say that and they want people to clap them on the back and act like everything is fine. And people are like, well, that's okay, that's nice, but it's not enough. And it's not enough, right? That's the problem.
And Americans do vote based on economy, time and time again.
We talked about how climate change is a non-issue, man. When we ask people, climate change is dead last. Yeah. Number one, always, is the economy. Absolute number one. So the reason that they're trying to push Bidenomics is because that their marketing guys have told them that the economy is the number one issue. But they're pushing it in a really naive way. They think that they can almost get one over on people by saying, well, this number is good, jobs numbers are good, and headline inflation is low. So that means things are great. And and this is a big problem, and it rankles at me, man. When I look on when I read the newspapers, open Twitter or something, and you see the usual crowd of people saying, hey, the economy's great. And then you walk down the street, like any street, and you see the state of people. Things aren't looking that good, man, right? So obviously some kind of disconnect when we have these
but
shocking
numbers. Isn't there
numbers.
A problem of kind of environmental and social blindness? So people would vote for Trump because he doesn't believe in climate change. And therefore, in the same way that he didn't believe in COVID, he closed his eyes and he was like, if we don't test, there'll be no cases because then the data wouldn't exist. He'll do the same with climate change. He'll be like, well, let's not measure the temperature of the earth. And then there's no climate change.
Right, exactly. Right.
And unfortunately, there are people that think that a vote for Trump is gonna be a better vote for them because of this thinking. I mean, it's embarrassing.
Right. Exactly.
That's a reality.
Exactly right. Look, this is an incredibly. It's how can I put it to you this way? When Trump was elected, okay, America was downgraded from a full democracy to a flawed democracy. This is in political science indicators of how healthy democracies are. If Trump is elected again, we will be downgraded again to an autocracy. Because at that point, you have somebody that's led a coup attempt as president, right?
And got away with it.
And got away with it.
The judiciary wasn't able to...
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had every sort of form of institutional failure accompanying this.
Yeah.
Right? And then after the fact, it took the Jan 6 Commission to kind of like turn the heat up on Merrick Garland, and then finally Jack Smith recently, right? We all know the story of the indictment and the charges and the whole 9 yards. Long process.
Yeah, it should have been done 2 years ago, and
should have been
Garland
done 2 years ago. Yeah, should have been done 2 years ago, and more to the point, a lot of American institutions had to fail to let that attempt happen in the first place. We are lucky that there are that it didn't succeed is down to a handful of people, right? It's down to like the Capitol police officers who kind of got the lunatics out of the way. Maybe we can put Mike Pence on the list. Some of the local election officials who refused to be pressured. So it was a very, very narrow thing that it didn't succeed. It wasn't like American institutions rallied around and came to the defense of democracy.
There was no system to protect.
There was no system to protect anything
on that day.
Yeah. So we have been watching a slow motion democratic collapse, and in some sense, Americans are waking up to it now, right? And I think that if we think back a couple of years, first there was the shock of Jan 6th. And if you remember, through Trump's presidency, there were those of us who'd been warning, hey man, this guy's not going to stop. He's going to try and block the peaceful trends. He's going to try everything to stay in power. And again, the centrists would come along and say, no, everything's fine. Not a fascist. Then it happened. And that forced a reckoning. The January 6th Commission came along and laid out how there was what they called sophisticated multi-part plan to overthrow democracy. That forced another reckoning. So now in public discourse, we become much more comfortable saying things like authoritarianism, fascism, democratic collapse, all these kinds of big words. This has been a slow process. And I think that now we are coming to the end game, right? That's what this next election is. It really is the end game.
It's the reckoning, isn't it? And
it's
Trump refers to it as him being your retribution.
Yeah.
You know, he now has done this whole thing of it's not you, you know, it's not me, it's you. I'm doing this for you. And then coming after not just me, but they're coming after you. I mean, these are very final terms, aren't they?
These are
really
incredibly
is an ultimatum for freedom.
This is the kind of stuff that we see, you know, if you're an aspiring demagogue, an aspiring dictator, you have to take it all the way to the limit. And when your back is against the wall, you have to go all in and double down. And that's what's happening here. And so the problem becomes for the Democrats, well, what do you do with all this, right? How do you deal with this? One way to deal with it, which is, I think, good and excellent, which is to appoint an impartial special prosecutor and let him do his work and stay out of the fray. Fine, good. The real question, though, is the political one, right? How do you politically kind of rescue the soul of a nation like that? And I don't, like, as an economist and an observer of social collapse, I don't have any easy answers, right? Like, you want to stop these problems before they start, right? So here we are, decades later, and we have this thing called Bidenomics, which is promising to transform America into an exporter again and revive the fortunes of the middle class. And even if people on the hard right don't see it, it's a good plan. And it will
he
work
should call it America First, and then more people would be interested, right?
Exactly. You should call it the real MAGA or something, and then people would eat it up. So that's part of the problem, right? Is that they're not communicating all of this well. The other part of the problem is that, you know, we really now are in a tricky political spot. So, okay, you have 30% of people who are diehard MAGA Trumpists. Unreachable. They will, you know, basically follow the movement into the grave. Whatever happens with them, fine, happens. You have the forces of sanity and progress from the center to the left, and then you have the independents in the middle, right? So there are three problems here. One is that even on our side, we are still infighting, man. Right?
Yeah.
We're still like bickering and squabbling and saying, well, Biden didn't really declare, and I'll be the first to say, man, Biden, get off your ass, declare a real climate emergency. But at the same time, we need to be pragmatic enough to understand what the stakes are here. Right? So the right wing does something really, really well, which is unify and pressure. We divide and deflate. And so we don't achieve our goals.
Because we question and we are obsessed with detail. And it's much easier to market a political movement with just the headlines.
Of course. Look, it's right. Exactly right. But look, it's happening in climate change, right? It's happening in climate change right now. So climate change right now, from the center to the left, is divided into, like, you know, what they've begun to call the doomers and whatever the other guys call themselves, right? Like, let's call them the rationalists. And the rationalists say to the doomers, hey, you think the planet is going to end and you're part of the problem and all this kind of thing. It's useless, right? Guys, we all have the same goal. Come together. So that's part of the problem. This is problem number one. Problem number two, as we all know, is how do you reach the independents? Well, the independents don't give a damn about anything from climate change to, you know, anything concerning the future of the planet or humanity. They just care about the economy. Number one, right here, right now, the economy. And in those respects, you know, the Democrats have got their work cut out for them because the economy is not where,
but it must be a mental illness to only care about the economy when you're not going to have a planet to have an economy on, right?
Right. Well,
it is literally a mental illness. It is it is a denialism, you could call it, but there's also a mental syndrome called disassociation.
Right.
So what I would put this down to is a international or national disassociative syndrome.
That's what it feels like is going on these days, right? It feels like there's something going wrong in people's heads. Like, can they not see what's happening? So part of the problem here is that, especially in America, we for decades let the right and the hard right define the economy the way that they wanted it to. Okay, so if we go back to when RFK was Attorney General, he very famously made a speech that talked about, quality of life, basically. And he said, GDP doesn't measure all the things in life that count. Okay, and we kind of stopped at that point. Yeah. And so now we have an economy that's kind of been defined by one side of politics to mean whatever they want it to mean. And so we have this insanity that that's going on in Hollywood, right? Where the studio heads are earning billions and the average writer can't afford a meal, right? So this is a problem that we have underinvested in for decades. Why did we let them? Let's go back to GDP for a second. Okay, so GDP, the big number. People think that GDP. I don't know what people think about GDP. Again, Americans live in a world where if you show them a number, they think it's authoritative, right? But GDP is just an estimate, right? It's statistically cooked up, basically. It's like
it's measured with things from decades ago that people. It's measured with things from decades ago,
and we measure it based on polls and surveys, right? So it's just it's a very loose number. So why is it that, for example, we are not counting the negative costs of climate change directly in GDP? It's not in there. Why isn't it? Right, so we need to update all these things in big ways. And unless we do it, this version of an economy goes on. And this version of an economy means one where, for example, energy companies can book huge profits because we don't say, hey, man, part of those profits are coming at the expense of a small town that just burned down in Hawaii.
And they're making more money than ever before. We shouldn't ignore the fact that energy companies have been pushing false propaganda against climate change for decades.
So now we are beginning to have a much better picture of that, and the picture that's emerging of that is bleak. But that is also, how can I put it? You cannot. Morally, it's a bad thing, right? But in this world, profit capital is going to do what it's going to do. The problem is also on our side. We have not had a unified message to really get out there and address this. And we've let our leaders get away with kicking the can down the road. And so why is it that Biden is the first guy to come along and say this, right? Obama didn't have much to say on the issue. Clinton didn't have much to say on the issue. Jimmy Carter had a bit to say on the issue, interestingly. So our side is playing catch up for decades and decades and we have these gaps that we've let build up over decades. I mean, if we think about, let's go back to the idea of Biden actually declaring a climate emergency, right? Okay, fine. Defense Production Act, getting up on the stage with Antonio Guterres and saying, hey, this is the age of global boiling, leading the world in a much faster way, saying, hey, man, all this jargon, Paris, blah, 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 2050, it's not working, guys. It's really not. Our approach is just leading to catastrophe.
Or admitting that we've failed. I mean, that's the thing that is never, ever done, right?
Right. It's never, ever done. And so this is one of our big problems, right? Why does... Let's go back to the classical appeal of a demagogue. Why is it that in an age where people need more money, they need security from mega weather, they need basic stability, they're turning to the far right? Why? It doesn't make any sense, right? They should be going on our side. Why is that? It's because the far right manages to sympathize with their feelings and their grievances in some way. And we are someone out there telling them that and at the end it gives them someone to blame. Whereas a lot of the times we refuse to recognize the problem. Like the Democrats are doing right now, right? They're saying, hey guys, what are you so worried about? The economy's great. It's not great. It's not great. We all know it's not great. So this is the big, so this is the disconnect. And we have to ask ourselves, why is our side losing so bad, right? Like we're getting hammered across the world right now. It's not a coincidence. It's got to be a reason for it, right? From Europe to Asia to America. I mean, why should it be the case that if you have a figure like Trump who's been indicted on all these charges, he's still neck and neck with a guy like Biden, who does, for whatever his flaws, no climate emergency, blah, blah, whatever, is at least offering some semblance of a transformative economic plan.
And isn't an autocrat. I mean, that's really all I'm looking for in someone to vote for. Yeah, somebody who is not a dictator.
Right.
But should we not be looking to Nazi Germany as it was to kind of see why people are drawn towards authoritarianism in times of crisis?
Right. Look, I have a very different interpretation about this than your typical American pundit does. And we've been having this argument for years now. And I think if they were right, then history would have changed and the appeal of Trumpism would have gone away. My argument is very simple. What happened in Nazi Germany? It's the same story. Everywhere we see fascism rise. Hard economic times.
Yeah.
They make people, and this is a very classical finding in macroeconomics, in fact. Okay, so after financial crises, we see huge right-wing shifts, and the bigger the financial crises, the further the right-wing shift. So, Great Depression, Nazis. So, why does that happen? Well, people fall on hard times. A demagogue comes along and blames it on some poor guy, some poor innocent guy, right? The Jew, the Pole, the immigrant. The immigrant, whatever, right? So the gay person. And so we see that really, really severe. We see that process of breakdown really, really severely accelerating in America right now. So right now, the leading edge of that isn't even with Trumpism, right? It's with DeSantis. DeSantis is pioneering the agenda that now a lot of red states are taking forward. And it is it's a seriously dire agenda. Right? I mean,
firing democratically elected people judges and
absolutely right. Attorneys. Textbook autocracy, right? Textbook autocracy. Yeah. We see him firing democratically elected officials. So this authoritarianism 101. We see the erasure of rights for all kinds of groups, right? You saw, from kids criminalizing teachers, investigating families.
People arrested for trying to vote.
People arrested for trying to vote. The special election police force. I mean, there's so much stuff. And this is part of the tactic, right? So, with on the battlefield, the Nazis, of course, called it a blitzkrieg. What we're seeing here is a blitzkrieg legislatively, politically. So there's so much stuff, Anthony, that if you and I were to sit down and say, what is all the crazy stuff DeSantis has done, we would be here for hours, right? And we'd be scratching our heads to think of every last example. It is an absolute blitzkrieg, right?
From and people Disney don't have hours, bands. Do they? I mean, isn't that part of the problem?
Exactly. That's exactly why it works.
Working, people are so busy tending to their families, looking after unwell loved ones.
Exactly.
Trying to pay medical bills, that they don't have the time for national conversations that are apocalyptic.
Exactly right. So this is the point, to overwhelm any semblance of sanity within existing systems and institutions. And what we've seen in Florida, at least, is that it's very successful. Now, the problem is that on the flip side, Florida is being run into the ground, right? The economy's not doing well. It's not
a good place to live. You mentioned insurance, but it's a disaster state.
It's a disaster, right? So, but that strategy works. And this is exactly what we see in kind of proto-fascist, fascist, authoritarian movements around the world. The problem becomes when you have, let me put it to you in a slightly different way. When Trump came to power, okay, if you remember 2016, even his team was shocked that they'd actually won, right? With a little help from, hacking Hillary's emails and all of this kind of thing. So they get into the White House and they don't know what to do with power. So they start flailing around. And of course, there are abuses of power here and there, and they don't really know what they're doing, and they start putting kids in camps or whatever, right? So, but the next wave of this stuff, which is spearheaded by guys like DeSantis and maybe even Youngkin, they're much more organized and they're much more disciplined legislatively. And so they're launching these legislative blitzkriegs. Now, the danger is that in the next election cycle, of course, that all of this kind of unifies.
Yeah. Because even if Trump goes, these surrogates are now in place.
They're now in place. They're now in place.
These people have effectively are undermining the democratic system.
They found a very good model to do it.
Views. Yeah.
They found a very good model to do it, to kind of corrode democracy at a local level, on the one hand, from the bottom up, and then again from the top down. Right? So if we look at DeSantis's, the way that he's done things, you have the don't say gay up here, and then you have pack the school board with fanatics here. And then the middle, the sanity gets squeezed out of society, to the point that now they're banning psychology classes, right? I mean, craziness. So the question is, so that's kind of the future if Trump gets in, right? The question isn't like, one question is, will we see a hard version of that or a light version of that? And the answer is, it doesn't really matter. The future, that's the autocratic future. And do you want your kids to grow up in a place like that? So that's what's on the line this election. And it's a really big deal. And the problem is that, you have the Democrats in there with a kind of lukewarm pitch about the economy, which is not really capturing, the soul of the nation. It's not really setting anybody on fire, is it?
But the truth would be more painful. And you end up in a situation where everyone's just pretending that everything's okay. Meanwhile, the world is collapsing around them.
Yeah.
We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the announcement from Merrick Garland of a special counsel to investigate Hunter Biden and the reasons behind that next on The Weekend Show. This episode of The Weekend Show is brought to you by Manukora Honey. Now, when I say the word honey, you might be thinking about the stuff that comes in those plastic bear-shaped bottles at the supermarket. Well, this is nothing like that. Manukora makes Manuka honey, a super honey that comes from New Zealand, where the bees only feed on the nectar of the Manuka tea tree, making something that is rich, herbaceous and complex with a creamier texture that's unlike anything you've ever tried before. You can use it just like the honey that you're used to, but Manuka honey is super because it also contains unique antioxidants and prebiotics, as well as a natural antibacterial compound called MGO that only comes from the nectar of this tea tree. These nutrients support optimal immune and digestive health, so it's win-win. You can continue to use honey in all of the ways you love, and you can enjoy all of the health benefits of MGO as well. Manukora sent me a jar and squeeze bottle of their 850 Plus MGO Manuka honey, their best-selling product. The 850 Plus honey has this creamy caramel texture that melts in your mouth, and it's unlike anything I've ever tried. I can grab a spoonful out of a jar and put it in my favorite beverage, or squeeze some honey out on some toast or oatmeal. It's delicious. Each morning I start my day with a spoonful of the Manuka honey, and it's the perfect amount of sweetness with the perfect consistency. If you head to manukora.com/weekend or use code WEEKEND, you'll automatically get an extra free pack of the 850 Plus honey sticks with your order, a $15 value. Now, I love the jar and squeeze bottle, but the extra pack of compostable honey sticks is also perfect for whenever you're on the go. You can bring them with you when you're traveling, if you need a quick snack or running errands, and they're the perfect energy boost if you're out for a run or at the gym. So go to Manukora, manukora.com/weekend or use code WEEKEND to get a free pack of compostable honey sticks with your order. You haven't tasted or seen honey like this before, so indulge and try some honey with superpowers from Manukora. If you have a family like I do, you know how much your loved ones depend on you. In a worst-case scenario, you wouldn't want them to worry about money. Policy Genius knows how valuable your time is. That's why their technology makes it easy to compare life insurance quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $25 a month for $1 million worth of coverage. Some options offer coverage in as little as a week and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius has licensed, award-winning agents who can help you find the best fit for your needs. They work for you, not the insurance companies. That means they don't have an incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Policy Genius is for parents, caregivers, and anyone else who has people who depend on them. They simplify the process of getting life insurance so you can protect the people you love. No wonder they have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot. Your loved ones deserve a financial safety net. You deserve a smarter way to find and buy it. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. We're back with Umair Haque on the weekend show. Hunter Biden, we're not going to hear the last of this, as Merrick Garland has announced a special counsel for the Hunter Biden investigation. He started a surprise press conference on Friday announcing the appointment of U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss, as special counsel in the investigation. Now, this is the guy that has been investigating Hunter Biden for the last year or so anyway, a couple of years. And so he's just elevated him to the role of special counsel. It seems pretty obvious to me, and I'm sure it is to you and everybody watching, but he's obviously done this to bring around some parity between the special counsel investigating Trump, and it shuts up the people who are saying Hunter Biden's laptop, Biden crime family. It just keeps those people quiet. And I'm sure that Hunter Biden is happy to be investigated because they're not going to find any elections being overturned, documents being stolen from the National Archives. Right.
It's a politically savvy move. Okay? So you have the right in the states, especially the hard right, baying for blood, that this is a big deal. Okay. Investigate it, see where it goes. Okay? So in that respect, yeah, it's a politically savvy move. I think there's a much bigger discussion here to be had. Okay? And the much bigger discussion here is about, it's hard to even kind of begin to put it into context, because this discussion hasn't been had in American media at all. And again, it's kind of like a weird and shocking failure. So let's talk about the seriousness and the gravity of charges against democracies by a head of state.
Yeah.
Okay? So we all know that the charges against Trump are historic. But what does that really mean? So we know that they're historic in an American context. I don't think that Americans understand that. We understand fully really how grave and
conspiracy to defraud the United States.
So when we look at across the world, there are leaders of various democracies that have been brought to account. Right? So even Sarkozy got brought up on charges. It happened to various politicians in Germany. It happened in South Korea. It's happened a lot. It happened in Italy to Berlusconi. It's not rare. It's not that rare to see a head of state in a democracy prosecuted. Number one, as a lot of people in America who are defending Trump are saying that this is unique and this is irregular. No, it's not unique and it's not irregular. It happens very often.
Yeah.
What is unique and what is irregular is the gravity of these charges. So when we look at all of these other figures who have been prosecuted as heads of state around the world in various democracies, those charges are like basically white-collar crime level charges. Yeah. Okay, they're like you took a bribe, or you influence peddling, or you took a gift you shouldn't have. They're not you attempted to overthrow our democracy.
Yeah.
And lead a coup.
And stole nuclear secrets and also the plans for an attack on Iran.
Right. And the whole 9 yards. So this part of the conversation is not, this context isn't being, so I'm sitting here in Europe, right? And as I sit here in Europe, the discussion is completely different, right? People are absolutely gobsmacked by the enormity of these charges. Because yes, they have seen their own leaders brought up on charges, but they're like petty crime charges compared to this.
And yet here in the US, it's been completely normalized.
It's been completely normalized, right? And so one of the things that needs to be, and it's a big failure by the US media, is to really inform people that these charges are historic, not just in the small sense of like American history, like the last 20 years. they're not even historic in the sense of all of American history. They are historic, like in the biggest sense, right? We have almost never seen a head of state brought up on charges like this outside a pure banana republic, and the charges are trumped up, or maybe after a long time somebody got justice for a coup or something. This kind of thing almost never happened. So these charges are incredibly historic, and they are incredibly damning. They are incredibly grave. And so what hopefully can happen is that, okay, fine, go ahead and investigate Hunter Biden and find whatever you find. Maybe we can bring that discussion, the real discussion, back to where it should be, which is to really begin focusing on and appreciating how serious this situation is. There is no other rich country in the world that has come close to charges like this. Not you can, right? Like, nobody is saying to Sarkozy, hey, we're going to put you, we're going to charge you with trying to overthrow the French Republic. Yeah. All of France would be on fire, right? Like,
well, they made a whole musical about it the last time. But nobody here in the kind of world of news commentary is saying or pushing Trump on, well, if you're innocent, why don't you want to go to court? Right, why don't you want to have a trial?
Right.
Why don't you just win this because you're going to win, because you're not guilty, and then the world can move on? And ironically, Trump would have been much better off allowing the peaceful transfer of power, letting Joe Biden become the president, seeing the economy continue to struggle because of world inflation, and then pushed all of his far-right agenda out loud, and then he would have won.
Absolutely right.
Right,
absolutely,
but he didn't.
Absolutely,
he put himself in a very difficult situation where there is now new charges in every jurisdiction. Yeah. I mean, he's going to be in court every week leading up to the 2024 election.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Look, we don't really recognize it yet, but the reason that I stress the gravity of these charges is that we are in a constitutional crisis. We just don't know.
Yeah. No one will admit it.
No one will admit it. Right. No one wants to admit it because we're all focusing on like
It's only other countries that will say that about another country. Exactly. They're having a constitutional crisis.
Right.
But there's not a single country on the planet that would admit to having
one. Right. Whereas when I go out here to the little dog park, everybody's like, oh man.
We're doing fine.
Right.
We're doing
fine. Yeah. Exactly. So this is a big problem. We're in a deep constitutional crisis. And we all know the problem that lies ahead, right? Which is that there was some crazy, I don't know where it was, some op-ed today arguing that, look, if he does manage to get elected and he's in jail, well, his Secret Service detail means he can't be in jail. So what's going to happen? Nobody has any idea, right? So it's almost a comical level of constitutional crisis.
Right. You can't jail this guy because there's no precedent, and his Secret Service people wouldn't know where to stand. They go in the cell, they stand outside the cell,
right? Put the guys in the cell next to him.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the question. So when I go out to the dog park here, right, in Europe, the very first thing everybody asks me every single day is, hey, listen, is Trump going to jail? Where are they going to put him if he goes to jail?
Yeah.
So nobody knows how to answer this question. So, but the almost comedy of it belies how serious it is, and what a bad job we are of really doing of really discussing this in an intelligent way in American media. Now, some credit to American media; they did a good job of covering the kind of like charges themselves. Yeah. Okay, the like details and giving people a bit of context, but then it stopped.
Yeah,
and the question, and so one of the interesting things, right, is that you saw the poll that the one thing that could change Trump's mind is if he's in jail. Right? So he's on the defensive now because he knows that this is slowly chipping away at his base. Maybe not in the sort of like super diehard MAGA, but the guys that are just like kind of barely still clinging on. Like, I don't know if this is my guy anymore.
For consistency and just some calm. And Trump represents chaos. But Umar, if you have a situation where you're not even certain if the former commander-in-chief can go to jail, then it almost kind of nullifies this whole process, because what's the end game to him going to all of these cases and being up in front of these judges and juries if he can't go to jail? Like, what's the point? And my personal feeling is he will never be incarcerated. A, because he's too old, B, because of the security situation, but C, because he's never going to shut his trap about this. It's a bit like the Tiger King in prison, right? Who kind of keeps communicating to the outside world about his innocence.
Right.
Trump will never stop lying. He will never shut up about this, whether he's under house arrest or out and free. This will not end until he passes away.
No. This will never end. This will never end. You remember when we talked about America trying to outrun things? Trump is the ultimate example of this, right? He spent his whole life outrunning things. And he's hoping that he can outrun this too. And we all know it. Now, the question that you raise is exactly the right one. Is he going to be able to outrun it? So one of the ways that I would answer, this is a very theoretical way to answer your question. Maybe it doesn't help anybody, but listen, when countries have democratic collapses, they generally tend to if they really want to bring the perpetrators to justice, they generally tend to employ special processes of justice. Okay, so they set up special courts, special tribunals, and there are special charges with special punishments. The problem in the States is that we have never come close to doing such a thing, and we didn't do it in Trump's case. So we are attempting to try what is basically a special crime in our everyday judicial system, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, right? There's a reason that The Hague exists. And The Hague exists because to try all these terrible kinds of crimes from around the world, we couldn't just put somebody on trial in their local everyday justice system. You can't have justice for such a crime. So we didn't do that. What we got instead was Merrick Garland appointing a special prosecutor working within the confines of the existing system.
Which the right are claiming is weaponized.
Right, which the writers are already claiming is rigged and weaponized in the whole nine yards. So this is why we're at an impasse, okay? It's very difficult to hold perpetrators to account for these crimes within the confines of your everyday justice. Man, that everyday justice system is meant to try like pink and white collar and blue collar and no collar crimes. It isn't meant to really try crimes of this grave, like fascist, authoritarian coup nature. It struggles to do that, and it always will.
When you take Trump out of the U.S., like when he went and made that speech at the UN, and everyone laughed at him, and he was like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that reaction," right? That should be, as you say, whether it be the Hague or the International Criminal Court or the European Court of Human Rights or any of these big international courts. It would change the dynamic because as long as he is in the US, especially if he's in Manhattan District, he is going to be the king of the castle. And at the UN, he was completely out of his depth.
Right. He's going to be the king of the castle for another reason, which is that he knows how to manipulate and play the media incredibly well. And for some reason, they're still falling for it. Right? It's like, it's like 10 years later.
It's advertising.
It's advertising. It's insta money, right? So they're still falling for it. So this crazy, vicious cycle is still going on where Trump will say something insane and then the media will eat it up and then we're back to square one, right? In the middle of all this, all these larger points that we've discussed get completely lost. And the average American who's living this life of fear and despair and stress and worry is like, man, what do I do about this? Am I like supposed to believe the Democrats and they say that the economy's great, but for me it still sucks and maybe it'll get better in like 10 years, but is that too late? And
if they're going after Trump, they're going to be coming after me next.
They're going to be coming after me and
batten down the hatches so sale of firearms goes up because people want to protect themselves.
Right. So we have really hard. So that, what you just brought up, that's a really advanced indicator of social collapse, right? These are serious indicators of social collapse. When we see suicide rates skyrocketing and arms sales rising, it's a big deal. And on some level, we don't. Part of the problem is that we don't really addressing this stuff enough, right? We're letting the lunacy dictate the terms of the conversation over and over again every day, and the vicious cycle just continues. And in the middle of it, I always come back to the one thing that I know to be true from the statistics, which is that a nation's politics and a nation's future depend in some sense on what is the actual state of people's lives and how are leaders talking to them about it? What are leaders saying to them about it? So in America, people are living terrible lives at the moment. And life is tough out there. You don't have to look very hard to see it. Now, the problem that we have is that we have one side of politics saying, hey, things are great. All you have to do is hang in there and things will continue to get better. You have the other side offering people scapegoats and all kinds of innocent targets.
Conspiracies.
For them to hit. Conspiracies and lunacy and God knows what, right? So this is a losing strategy, if you ask me, right? Because the average person much more likely to turn to the demagoguery and the scapegoating than they are to think that they have the strength to hang in there for however long it's going to take for this grand plan to work. So something on our side needs to recognize how badly people are doing at the moment, even if they won't tell you, because as Americans, we don't like to admit that. Man, nobody wants to come out and say, hey, I'm struggling, my life sucks, things are hard, I can't put food on the right. So nobody wants to say that.
So is it worth talking about American exceptionalism and how this idea, because, you talk about outrunning it, and I think that's so interesting, the idea that you can outrun it, except, it reminds me of Indiana Jones running away from the ball.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like visually, nobody expects Indiana Jones to get crushed, right? And not to be able to make another movie again.
Right.
But that's the reality of the U.S. Social system and economy. And it's not Joe Biden's fault. See, this is the other thing, isn't it? People are obsessed with apportioning blame.
Right.
It's like, you either have Trump's economy or you have Biden's economy. It's neither of them. It's the American economy and it's the world economy.
Look,
and it's irrelevant which leader is in the White House.
Look, Anthony, this stuff goes way... Look, one of the big problems that we have in America is that, exactly as you said, we apportion blame, right? And we apportion blame in order to build a very simple mental model of the cause and effect. So if it's that guy's fault, he must be the cause of it, and that's where we can stop thinking.
And it takes the pressure off of us.
And it takes the pressure off of us.
Yeah.
If we've got our explanation, right?
Yeah.
It's not that simple. So American exceptionalism, what is it about? Well, at the root of it, it's in the modern context. It's one of the ideas that we discussed shortly a little while ago, which was the idea that America is the only rich country that doesn't have to evolve towards becoming a social democracy. That we can be the country that has a consumption rate of 80% and an investment rate of just 20%, and things are going to be okay for us forever. Instead of, with such a low investment rate, we're not going to have healthcare, we're not going to have good schools, we're not going to have decent roads, and heaven forbid climate change happen because our infrastructure will be cooked then. So,
well, it's already those things, isn't it? Because there is no healthcare system. Right. There is just a profiteering, racketeering system. The roads are already crumbling because of the heat. Education is on its knees.
So all of these systems have crumbled because we have believed in this exceptionalist myth. So the problem that we face, and it's a very strange one, is that we still think, thanks to the propaganda coming from a certain side, that we are going to be able to outrun these problems. Even though the problems have already caught up with us. They're right in front of us. It's no mystery, right? That the average American struggles to get health care, pay their bills, or have savings, or all of these things, right? So the problems of underinvestment have already caught up with us. And the problems of not having a modern social contract have already caught up with us. We are not recognizing that enough, right? On either side of our politics. And I really mean that. So obviously on the right, the idea of a social contract is like the Handmaid's Tale or something at this point, right? But on the center and the left, what is our idea of a social contract? It's not really there fully, right? It's not fully formed. It's like, even if you want to go towards Bidenomics and tell me how great it is, and I agree with you, it's great, fine. But it's not a fully fleshed out social contract, right? So this problem goes back decades. That's why I say this is not like Biden's fault or this guy's fault, anybody's fault. This is a much deeper problem. Let me give you an example that may help it make sense. One of the few countries in the world that has managed to do two things very successfully lately: restrain their far right and control their inflation rate is Spain. Okay, so Spain managed to beat back its far right to a lot of people's surprise. And it managed to control its inflation rate. So how did it control its inflation rate? So a combination of things like rent controls, price controls, taxes, all the stuff that we would never ever really do in the States. Now, why is that possible in a country like Spain? Well, it is because they're able to have probably a more sophisticated and nuanced discussion about these things. Their Overton window is much bigger, right? And people are allowed to connect these causalities in a way that is much more comprehensive than just it's that guy's fault or it's this guy's fault. It's no.
And geographically, I think people forget that in Europe, we have conversations that cross cultures.
Absolutely.
And we look to other nations. You know, in the UK, we always used to refer to Scandinavian nations for quality of life.
Yeah.
But the US being an isolated continent, where its closest relation is Mexico and Canada, is not really able. I mean, I'm surprised that the US doesn't look to Canada. It just takes the mickey out of Canada.
Right?
Canada is doing so well.
Weird. Yeah.
Comparatively.
It's so strange to me because at this point in human history, when I look at the stats, Canada is one of the most successful societies in human history by like light years, right? Canadians are like they have such good lives. Thank your lucky stars if you're Canadian. Thank Pierre Trudeau if you're Canadian. So it's amazing. And this is one of the big problems in the States, right? Is that we go back to your point about exceptionalism. How is it that this is a country that you step across a fictional border and everything is different?
Yeah.
And it's literally right there, right? So
free healthcare, socialized medicine, education.
I often tell my own story of growing up in the States, right? And you can imagine what life was like for a brown kid in those days. Yeah. It was not easy, let me tell you. Yeah. So I got accepted to college in Canada. And I didn't know what Canada was at the time. I thought Canada was like, Vermont Part 2 or something. So I get on the train, I go up to Canada, and I don't come out of my dorm room for a month. Because these kids are so nice. I've never seen people be this nice to each other growing up in the way that I did in the States, right? I'm convinced that behind this niceness is some kind of sinister front that's totally like super fascist or something. So talk to anybody for a month. And then I started making friends and everything. So it is a totally different society. And I raise the point of niceness because all of this comes down to norms in a way, right? It's much deeper than like economics or just politicians or this guy or that. It's about norms. It's about what do we believe in and hang together for as a society. So Canada's norms are really, really special. People are really kind and tolerant and gentle with each other in Canada. And that's just not just an airy-fairy thing. It's why they're able to invest together and have functioning systems. It's what makes them such a successful society. That is what powered Europe ahead until in the last few years, the far right has emerged, preying on people's insecurities. So in America, we never have that discussion, right? We never have this discussion of like, there's no question anymore, right? So let me put it to you a different way. Today, I was writing about why is the suicide rate skyrocketed in the last few years? And I mean, I know why. We all know why. It's because American life is brutal. It's one stressor after the other. Bills you can't pay, a job you don't want to go to, vacation time you'll never have, a retirement that you can never afford, a house that you always feel you're on the edge of losing. We all know why it's so high. You can fall through the cracks at any moment, everything's gone and it's over. But the norm is that we don't even discuss that much. So we never have a discussion about our norms in America. We never have a discussion about, well, how did it become normalized to treat each other this way? How did it become normalized not to discuss our problems in a mature way? How did it become normalized to kind of say, hey man, I want to take something away from you, your rights or well, it doesn't matter, right? So that level of discussion in America is what we don't have, and that is where America is a really different society. Even if you go to Asia, norms are completely different. Like, it's chill, right? It's cool. Like, everybody's hanging out. It's communitarian society, close-knit elders and family units and the whole nine yards. America is the outlier in terms of norms. Other societies have found ways to be societies, to hang together. America has atomized further and
yet
further.
The wealth, the concentrated wealth, there is enough to go round. I should quote Robert Reich, actually, who said recently that record profits translates into unpaid wages.
That's right. That's right.
And
right.
I thought that was a very kind of powerful statement from an economist, right?
That's right.
Record profits equals unpaid wages. And really, to me, that kind of sums up what the US has become. We here in the US, we celebrate companies like, who are making a fortune, and it's like, yes, America, you can make so much money, billions.
Yeah.
The cruise industry, interestingly, has been cutting back. The cruise industry has been cutting back on service and food quality and all of the things that you would go on a cruise for. It's all gone, right?
Yeah.
They don't turn your bed down anymore. The buffet is a disaster, right? None of those ice sculptures. It's all gone. And yet, last week, Royal Caribbean announced a record profit of $350 billion.
Right.
And you know, they've done that by price gouging and by kind of using the pandemic as an excuse for having to kind of recalibrate. And who pays for that?
Right.
It's the traveler. It's the passenger.
Right.
Who weirdly, they call guests, and I've never understood that.
It's bizarre. Look,
if you're a guest, it should be free.
Right. This whole economy is absolutely bizarre from a global perspective, right? If you come to Europe and you say the CEO of my company is being paid $700 million a year, like the head of a Hollywood studio, they look at you like no CEO is earning $700 million a year, right?
No human is worth that.
No human is, right? So it's completely out of bounds. It's so far out of bounds that, exactly. In America, this kind of thing has become normalized. And it's become normalized because we have a norm. We have this Nietzschean norm that the strong survive and the weak perish, and it's a winner-take-all kind of dog-eat-dog thing.
And celebrate it. So the poorest people are the people voting for Donald Trump.
Right.
It's the people who are dispossessed.
Exactly
It's the people who give their last cent to him to pay his legal bills.
Well, this is the great paradox, politically speaking, right?
Yeah.
Politically and socially speaking, is that in America right now, it is... historically, for the last 20 years, the way that the right wing has converted the working class is that it has been kind of there to point out all of these losses and to say that, yes, society should be, that there should be a community there, that you should have social bonds, that you should have social ties, that life shouldn't be so stressful all the time. And it's, in a sense, our side, the centrists and the left, not the far left, but just the kind of like DC establishment center left, who has been on this kick of fetishizing, you know, this winner-take-all meritocratic kind of weird Praetorian Guard society, which is like, hey, man, if you're good, you'll go to Harvard and you'll go to Yale and your life will be great. And if you're not, well, you're just you're going to live an average life.
You'll go to hell.
You go to hell, right? And that's the way society should be.
Yeah.
Right? And it's stupid. No, that's not the way a society should be at all. There is a case for like, okay, if you're smart and you're a nerd and you want to go to like a Harvard or Yale and be whatever, it's fine. But that doesn't mean that the average person should never be able to survive and have a decent life. It doesn't mean that.
And I think about my children and their future, and I have young kids, and I think about whether or not, you know, their life will be so different to my life. You know, for me growing up in the 80s, like they will never have those kind of norms. You know, we used to living in Europe, so we'd fly to Spain, invariably make these little flights. Like, these things will be impossible, you know, like just getting about. I mean, and even that's starting to happen now. I think Americans are having to adjust the way they travel because of climate and because of cost. And so, you know, the effect of climate change, just to wrap up, the effect of climate change is actually starting to touch us, not just in terms of the wildfire. And there was one actually at the, like, half a mile from me 2 Saturdays ago, like a brush fire. And I've never had it that close, you know, and I've reported about it in California before, but never like down the hill. Yeah. And I'm really very much of the opinion now that there isn't a single one of us who isn't touched by the effects of the heating planet, of the burning planet, the cost of living on an international level. And so we're all going to end up just staying home. You know, the idea of just going places is...
You're 100% right.
We're all going to end up staying home, which I'm already doing. I don't know about you, but I don't really go anywhere anymore.
Well, the light can kill me, so I'm home a lot. I mean, look, one of the best analogs, one of the best models, best lenses with which to understand the effects of climate change is lockdown. And not a lockdown that, like, the right wing says is imposed by the horrible government. Yeah. Oh, it's just, you can't leave. The heat is going to kill you, or you can't get anywhere. There's a fire 3 blocks away, or what have you, right?
And ironically, lockdown was better. It was better for families. It was better for not driving your car and polluting the planet. It was better for companies to realize that working remotely is just as productive, if not more productive, than making people travel an hour into the office.
Yeah, you were talking about your young family. And one of the best ways to understand climate change, and one of the ways I think in which, figures like me have a responsibility and a challenge to bring it to life for people, is not to think about it as like this boring anodyne issue. What is it really, man? Look, human history went like this. Line, slavery, empire, industrial revolution, bang, progress. You and me have grown up probably in the peak of what we call human prosperity.
Yeah, I was thinking this. It's done.
And it's now done. We have already 4 to 5 generations in downward mobility.
Yeah.
Right? So you and me, if we count ourselves Gen X, we're part of the right where it started to decline and flatten.
Yeah.
And now, unless we get this right, every generation has downward mobility. Now, I'm not saying things are going back to the Stone Age, but the question of where they settle is anybody's guess. Is it going to be in some kind of weird Trumpist dystopia? Is it going to be a Ron DeSantis Handmaid style fascist dystopia? Is it going to be, where's it going to end? Right? So
and people will end up living their lives by proxy through Instagram. Yeah. So people will be home. They'll be looking at wealthy people's lives who can afford to travel, who can afford air conditioning, and who can afford to have the life that most of us used to have. Yeah. They'll be watching it on their feed and thinking like they'll be living vicariously through other people. And that's already happening. This is
why we need to get it right now.
Yeah.
Because if you go back to one of the things we started this conversation with was, okay, we can produce electricity renewably, but we don't know how to produce the rest of the stuff. Food, cement, iron, blah, blah, steel, glass, plastics, go down the list. You come back to the idea of, if you really understand that, and you understand how fast systems are falling apart, then you really come to a bleak future where, if we don't know how to make this stuff, and we're running out of the resources to make it with, or every time we make some of it, it's sending the temperature skyrocketing even more. You have huge falls in living standards as a result of it.
Yeah.
And that is how you have this kind of like downward trajectory of human progress. So that is what we're really up against. And our side doesn't talk about it. It doesn't think about it. Doesn't say it enough. The only guy that's up there really talking about it. A
lot of people write to me and ask me to talk about some good news occasionally. They're like, why is it always bad news, right? But there is a serious point to this, and that is that as humans, we crave the dopamine associated with good news or good feeling or positivity.
Yeah, listen, this isn't
and we
a story.
can do that in our communities, with our neighbors and our friends and our families. Outside of government control and all of those things, we can do that, but we need to lower the bar on what makes us feel good.
Yeah,
right?
Look, this shouldn't be a story of bad news for anybody. It should, and again, we need to learn to tell the story in a very different way. Every generation has its challenge. Every generation has its challenge. Do we think that we're going to get away scot-free? No, of course not. This is our challenge. We have to kind of rise to that challenge.
But the differential is the climate. I mean, that is the differential,
the differential
between
is the stakes.
This generation and the previous generation complaining about what they have to deal with.
Yeah.
Is that the planet is irreversibly burning.
It's irreversible and it's civilizational. So this is the first. So we can see ourselves in two ways, right? We can see ourselves as people who've inherited this insoluble problem, or we can see ourselves as people who can make the biggest transformation in human history. Who can say, okay, man, that phase of human history is over, and now we've learned to cooperate at a planetary scale, and we have systems that work for everybody, and we've crossed that threshold in our history. So that's the way that I see it, and that's the way that I think that we need to tell this story a little better, right? Because we come back to like the Bidenomics pitch. It doesn't really grab anybody, right?
Yeah,
but
it's going to change if he wins the election. I would like to put my faith in the fact that he knows how serious the climate crisis is. And if he wins and he manages to bring with him those independent voters and those swing voters, then he will get on the stage with Antonio Guterres. Yes. Then he will look down the barrel of the lens and be
I agree with you 100%.
This is the international.
I agree with you, and I'll tell you why. Because if you think back to when Biden was elected, the idea that he would do what he's done to date was totally off the table. Nobody thought he was going to be elected and immediately take on climate change, even in the small way. Yeah. Right? Nobody thought that he was going to have this kind of what is actually a pretty brilliant plan to make America a net exporter again.
Yeah.
Nobody thought that. People thought he's going to come in, he's going to be a typical neoliberal, and no. So for the first time in living memory, America has what is known as a national industrial strategy.
Yeah.
It's remarkable, right? This is the thing that powered South Korea from a poor nation to a rich nation. We've never had one because we've been under the thrall of free market, trickle-down economics, right? Hard right-wing stuff. That has been disproven time and again, but our side has not been brave enough to say, hey man, okay, well if that doesn't work, then let's do what actually works. So, to Biden's credit, he has done some of that. And so I agree with you. If he does win, then the gloves will come off and he will be able to make some really dramatic and transformative changes. The question... And play catch up and play leadership, man. For me, I would love to see an American president up there on the stage leading the world and saying, guys, we have like 10 years to get this right, or else how many more summers like this do you think we can take? Yeah. I mean, somebody needs to do it, right? It's
not even complicated, is it? I mean, this is the thing. It's not complicated, and because everyone's feeling it. But I do have faith in him, provided he lives long enough to actually make this happen. He's very fit and healthy, so that's a good thing. But, this is really, a lot of these things come down to one person. The rise of fascism is down to one person.
That's right.
And the person whose job it is to try and put the country back on a new footing is also down to one person who's going to be 82 when the election comes about. It's
true.
Listen, we have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you. We could talk for hours and hours and hours, and maybe we should do it again. Not wait so long next time.
We will. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate it, man. That was really fun.
For joining me.
Cheers.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism on Patreon at patreon.com/5Minute News. And my 5-Minute News daily podcast drops every morning, so you can hear me tell you what's going on around the world while you make a morning coffee. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and more factual news stories to discuss on the 5-Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.